Once upon a time, 3 little engines lived in their own little shed on their own little railway. Duke was brown, Falcon blue, and Stuart green.
If you have been with me through the start of this channel, you will know I started this all with a little series called The Tales of the Mid Sodor Railway. The layout I filmed that series on was a thin 4x4 foot board with none of the scenery glued down. When the series got canned, the layout soon followed. I have not made a layout based on the Mid Sodor Railway ever since. Until now. That's right, it is finally time. I am now making a proper Mid Sodor Railway layout in 009. I was not only inspired by Audrey's original layout, but with the amount of Mid Sodor videos I've seen in the past year or so truly inspired me. It is my turn to take a crack at it myself. This layout will be a project that has not and likely will not be surpassed in terms of scale and complexity, and I am excited to show what I have done so far. But first, let's start out with the plan. Every layout needs a plan for the desired outcome. Normally, this would be extensive track plans that would most likely use some sort of digital software. I tried this, but I don't really like working like this. I like to create a list of criteria for my layout to meet and plan out subsections of those key areas for the layout to using that criteria. I then try my best to connect all those subsections in the building process and kind of adapt as I go. So here are some of the key things that I want present on the layout, starting from the operation side of things. Number 1. The layout must be able to be operated from either side. Operating from either side will allow me to change the scenery on the layout that the audience will see. This does mean that there won't be a backboard like Audrey's layout. Think more of the core-ish layout by George Williamson. Number 2. The layout will have point motors and electrofrog points. Point motors help streamline the operation of things, and electrofrog points help minimize stalls for the locomotives. These are a little bit complicated, but when we get to them, I will be sure to explain everything. Number 3. The layout will have 2 running lines. Having multiple trains on the layout at once is just way more visually interesting than just one. And finally, the layout will be 3 foot by 5 foot. My original layout was 4 foot by 6 foot, which isn't very big by most people's standards. However, it was too big for my room and was very hard to maneuver around. By decreasing a foot off of the length and width, I think it would be easier to maneuver around and just give me more space. And also, if you know anything about 009, the size isn't really the issue because you can put so much into such a small space, so I think it will be able to be a decent size to fit everything. So that's all the boring technical things out of the way. Let's go into what's actually going on the layout. I've narrowed it down to 4 main locations that I want present on the layout. These being Arlesdale Station, Olstead Road, Casneyhowen Station, and the Casneyhowen Mines. Arlesdale Sheds and the station was never present on Audrey's layout, and I think it would be interesting to have this on the layout, and it would also double as a fiddle yard when the layout is facing the other way. Casneyhowen Station and Olstead Road are classics. You just gotta have them on a Mid Sodor layout. However, what I'm most excited about is the Casneyhowen Mines. Many creators have portrayed the Casneyhowen Mines as a slate quarry for years. I don't know where this information came up from, but like how we all thought that this was Atlas, it's just simply untrue. Not to say that these works are bad or anything because they're using this information, I'm just saying that the Casneyhowen Mines was never a slate quarry, it was always a lead mine. So that's the plan, for both operation and for what's going on in the layout. Now let me show you what I've got done so far. So the first thing I did was I constructed the baseboard, but I didn't record this part because I didn't really do the best job. This was the first time I actually made a proper baseboard, and I used some methods that weren't exactly the best, but the main gist of how I made it was I assembled a frame at the bottom that measured 3 by 5 foot, then attached a 2 by 4 foot baseboard using metal brackets like so. Then I laid 5mm plywood over the bare areas for the descending parts of the layout. The next thing I did was stack some foam board on the edge of the upper section of the layout to accommodate for a larger radius curve. This method definitely wasn't the way to go, and you'll see later on how I replace it. Now it's time to start putting down some track. I started by making a second radius curve on the far left side of the layout and expanding it from there. I'm using Peco 009 Flex Track for this, specifically the Crazy Track variant. When dealing with FlexiTrack, you're most likely going to have uneven ends. So to solve this, I use a Dremel tool to cut off the excess length. Also, before you even make the curve, cut off a few sleepers off the ends to make room for the rail joiners to connect. I much prefer FlexiTrack over SetTrack. Having the ability to change the curves on the fly is very convenient, and also it's just generally cheaper than SetTrack. I then installed the Electrofrog points, which needs 2 holes drilled out to accommodate for the point motor arm and the common wire attached to the frog. I should have used the drill, but it was like 10 PM when I was filming this part, so give me a break. These are unmodified Electrofrog points, so the power running through the point relies on the connectivity between the point blades. This sounds a little bit complicated, but in simple terms, 2 sets of points cannot lead against each other like shown here. To avoid short circuits, you have to attach plastic rail joiners in between them. The little booklet that comes with your Electrofrog points has a clear diagram of how points must be wired. Again, this will be explained later on when we get to the wiring portion. I was about 90% done with the yard area until I decided to get rid of that little slip of track in between those 2 points. This helps make the layout look a little bit more tidy and the yard a little bit more concise, so it just looks better overall. Once the yard area was done, I laid out some more foam on the right side of the layout in order to extend the top half some more. I actually put some cardboard on it this time and smoothed it out with filler to make it more even with the actual board, but again, wasn't too keen on this. Now it was time for me to tackle the declining section down to the mines. I don't know why, but I thought it would be a great idea to use these balsa wood pillars that would screw into the baseboard from the bottom. The area of track where there would be no supports would then have a plastic sheet or cardboard glued underneath, and expanded spray foam would fill in these sections. This was another part that I was not pleased with, and you'll see how I change it later on. At this point, the Alzo sheds and the descent into the lead mines was completely done. Now, this next portion I forgot to film, but if you notice in this clip, the points were laid on the surface of the baseboard, making the descent to those points from the top section a much greater angle. This caused my engines to wheel slip really bad and was just too much for them to handle. So out of balsa wood, I created these elevated boxes for the points to sit on. This also houses the point motors, which I already installed. I won't go over how I wired them right now, that will be focused on the next episode, but just know I already did them. I also got rid of this foam section on the right side of the layout and replaced them with balsa wood blocks to hold up the track. By this point, the main loop is done and operational. Now it was time for the elevated portion. To make the incline, I will be using Woodland Scenics 4% incline sections and various heights of risers. I should have used these for the declining section from the start, as these are very good products to use. They do get a bit pricey, but I think it's worth it. They get a 7 out of 10 from me. I will link all the things I use and where I got them in the description below. To install these risers, I used some Dap caulk/adhesive where the risers would lay on. This stuff is cheap, yet durable, basically budget flex glue. I spread the beads of caulk out to form a smooth contact surface and lay the 4-inch riser on top. The glue grabs onto the foam instantly and stays in place well. I then glued on an inclined portion on top of this riser using the same glue. This part here will also be changed later, but I laid painter's tape on top of the risers to block off the gaps the risers have. These have gaps so they can be easily maneuvered, but this will cause problems later when we need to balance the track. However, a better method will be used later, and an even better method will be used even later, as you will see. We can now lay some track, and to make sure the curves aren't too tight, I have my largest locomotive Stanley to run these curves. A 9-volt battery is used to temporarily power the track, and if Stanley can run around these curves, most likely all my other engines can too. These incline sections lead up to a roughly 18-inch diameter plywood disc, which itself leads to a base for more incline sections to be built onto. This disc is held up by small balsa wood pillars, and the incline section now has filler to fill in the gaps in those risers. This in theory should hold up better than the tape and still solve our issue when we have to ballast the track. However, a much better method will be used later. A much larger rectangular baseboard was installed on the far left side of Arlesdale sheds. This would ultimately be where Olstead Road would go, and I pre-installed the point motors on here so that I get some practice for when I install the point motors on the other parts of the layout. The last parts of the incline section were then placed, leading to another plywood disc. However, this one was only 14 inches in diameter. This is an extremely tight curve, and I got the curve smooth enough and level enough just for Stanley to run on it. Here's some test footage of the upper loop. This was the first time I actually tested the loop, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. So at this point the layout was completely operational and the track work was technically done, and I could have called it done here. But all those aforementioned issues really bothered me and dampened my mood on the layout, so I went to change those issues. First, I replaced the balsa wood pillars that held up the descending track and replaced them with risers and incline foam pieces. The gaps in the risers were then filled with modeling foam. This stuff is so goated, it is easy to use, easy to clean, and it dries just as rigid as insulation foam. 10 out of 10 would recommend. I left a few gaps in the mine portions so that I can install some small bridges later on. I then removed those stacks of foam on the backside of the layout with a putty knife and a hammer and began to pry them off the plywood base. These were replaced with Woodland Scenics risers with roughly 5mm balsa wood planks to make sure the track was mostly level. To ensure an even smoother transition was made, I put some cardboard in between them so to make sure that the main loop was nice and level for the trains to run on. So there's the layout as of right now. Everything's running great, now the trains derail, everything's decently sturdy. Most of the hard stuff is now done. Now let's get some trains and start running them on the layout. Now, while most of the hard work is done, we are only beginning, as in the next episode, I will cover everything in terms of the electrics for the layout, including powering the track and operating point motors, which is something I have never done before. I want to thank each and every one of you for your patience for this video. I started this layout back in January, and it just took me till now to make the video for it, so I deeply apologize for it, and I hope it's all worth it. The next video should not take as long to come out as this one has. To be notified when that episode releases, please subscribe to the channel for more of this Mid Sodor layout. That is all for now, and I hope to see you very soon.